Here we go. Now, I don't know whether this was a big issue for a lot of you, but feedback that came back sort of repeatedly, there were some complaints about linking letters to sounds, and sort of it was, that's for kindergarten, it's not for preschool. So you'll notice in the chapter, the contexts where they are linked often are writing contexts and a response responding to a child who says, hey, help me, I want to write this. And then the other context is with alphabet books, and not just naming the letter on the page, but reviewing the words that are there and then saying, oh, and those all start with B, and that's why they're on the B page. So I don't know how many of you read that sort of rationale. In the foundations, it says children will know some letter sounds, but it doesn't say anything about how they come to know letter sounds. And what I see in a lot of classrooms is children learning letter sounds associatively. So they understand. Now, I go a long way back, and I remember being told way long time ago in a reading class, letters do not have sounds. Don't ever say that. They represent sounds. So when I hear letter sounds, what sound does that letter make? I think, oh. But seriously, when we're at the preschool level, here's what I think is the big issue. We can say letter sounds. We can teach those to children associatively. They do not know that the sounds we're talking about are sounds we hear in spoken words. Okay? I have a problem with that. And it's not too hard in a writing context or in an alphabet book context to link these sounds and words to the letters that represent them. Okay? So just from the point of view of making things, well, and I think we mislead children when we keep these things isolated. So we have phonological awareness over here, we're working on that. We have letter ID over here, we're working on that. And then we're doing these letter sounds associatively. And we know from research at the kindergarten level that the application of those separate silos to actually reading and writing words is very low, unless we bring those together. And it's usually in a writing context in the research, so that children begin to understand, oh, letter sounds, oh, it's the sounds I hear in words. And I think we can model some of that at the preschool. I think you need to be careful. But I think it's always problematic to have to get children past the barrier that you've created. So we have letter sounds and I in a silo. They've got phonological awareness in another one with the two not being brought together until later. Meanwhile, I think kids could understand a few things. And the alphabetic principle, which is the understanding that letters represent, letters and written and printed words represent sounds and spoken words, that's a big idea. And Marilyn Adams, actually, in the 1990 book, Beginning to Read, there's a place where she discusses this, and she said that big idea is there before they have many specifics of letter sound associations. And I fully agree with her. I mean, it's there if we link it. And you know, that's a big idea. I think we need to talk sometimes about big ideas. That idea of, oh, that's what letters do. And I think that positions children for a different level of alertness even, and even wanting to know how you write sounds in spoken words that they might not ask. But it's one of those areas I think we need to think about. And when we're dealing with very low income at-risk populations, you know, we cannot lockstep everything. It takes too much time. You know, we just don't have time to waste to lockstep everything. So where we can link early on without pushing kids, but just as models and explaining what we're doing when we help them spell a word. And if we can decrease the time it takes for children to get some central ideas together, sort of all the better. So I don't know, you probably have questions and comments about, I don't think there were any questions in my email about that one. Okay. The other thing that's pretty clear in research on somewhat older children is that the actual writing, actually linking letters to sounds in spoken words, increases phonological awareness. And we know that when kids start to learn to read instruction, the phonological awareness goes up. So we might be able to increase phonological awareness, particularly at the phoneme level, if we started linking a bit. And by the way, 20 letter names map onto 20 phonemes. In other words, the sound they most typically represent is in their name. Sometimes it's in first position, sometimes it's in second. So with F, it's the second position. With B, it's in first position. But we know that with a little bit of modeling of linking letters and sounds, and modeling that ourselves when we spell for them, they then begin to use their letter ID knowledge to link to some sounds. In words we segment, I see classrooms where kids are calling out the letter as soon as the teacher's segmenting the sound in the word as she's helping spell. So it's kind of interesting to see the kind of power it gives to children also when they know that there's a link here between letters and the sounds they hear in words. So something to think about, and I think we could do a little more of that at the preschool level than we sometimes do.
Just an open-ended question.
And where?
Me again.
Oh, yeah, hi.
I'm struck by the example of the teacher you gave with the backhoe and all that languaging that was going on, and indeed, that was certainly a rich interaction around one word.
Yes.
And
well, it was more than one word because she was comparing it to other words of construction vehicles that they had. Yeah. So it just raises the question. Then you think of these very large differences amongst children in the number of words they grow and what happens. Yes.
No, and what happens with that over
Yes.
time. Do you have any thoughts about the number of words and how large a corpus of words we need to be thinking about in preschool, because there are trade-offs?
It's got to be more than 3 a day, or we aren't going to close any achievement gap. The capacity at the preschool level, I mean, it depends on how you count words and whatever, but it's really about 9 words a day at the upper limit. If you look at the children who go into first grade with 10,000 or more, 9 words a day. And that's not because the capacity is any different by and large. I mean, you get capacity differences within groups. There are going to be individual differences within groups. But we shouldn't have huge differences that we have across groups. That's access. That's access, lack of. So B. Miller and people say 3 a day. There should be 3 words a day. 3 new vocabulary words a day. So for a week of 5 days in preschool, it should be 15 words a week. And what I'm saying is, you get a 4-year-old, and I'm trying to think of the Huttenlocher numbers, because she's the one who did the input study of parents, and then she had numbers of words associated with input. So by 2 years of age, it was like a 300-word difference. By 3, I mean, it was just phenomenal, the word difference. Or just look at Hart and Risley. If we get children at 4 years of age who are already several thousand words behind, we have to have more than 3 words a day. We have to. So we need 20 a day. But anyway, so I think we should shoot for higher rather than lower. Now, we have to be careful, though, because as soon as and also we can talk about the exposure, how many words they're exposed to, as opposed to how many of those they actually learn. And it is also the case that the words help you learn new words, and also on a test can help you pick the right one, even though you don't know that particular item, but you know the other 3, or at least 2 of them. You know it's not this and not that, and so you pick here, and you got somewhat lucky. But anyway, I would say it has to be at least 5 words a day, and we're only talking about school. So we really have a ton of work to do here. So that's why with the story reading, and I know your work and others, we get good outcomes from vocabulary and shared reading when it's done, when the vocabulary is supported. So I think we still have to look at shared reading as a context in which we can get some vocabulary. But I do think we have to be careful about undermining some of the comprehension stuff. And I don't really have a good solution to that. I just think we do have to be careful. And then I think we need to think of some other contexts, such as pictures. around which we can teach vocabulary in a conversational way and so forth. And then I think, we really need to interact with children in center time. And I also, when I listen to teacher language, it's not very rich. And one of my favorite teachers, an old experienced teacher in child care, high school diploma in our first early reading first project. And once she had permission to talk, and as she said, to use big words, she was unbelievable. And I remember she was introducing the Snowy Day, and the children had already heard 3 Keats books, Whistle for Willie, Peter's Chair, A Letter for Amy before this one. And so she starts out saying, "Oh, I think you probably know who this little boy is on the cover." And someone guessed it was Peter. And she said, "Yes, and this is another book by her favorite author, Ezra Jack Keats." At that point, just spontaneously, one child said, yeah, the Peter's Chair one. And she said, "Yes, Peter's Chair." And then the Whistle one. And listen to the titles. It wasn't, "What is it? Who remembers?" "I know what you mean. It's the Whistle one." "Yes, Whistle for Willie." He wrote that one too. And then someone, like that Letter for Amy. And yes. And then she says, "Mr. Keats, he wrote so many books. He was such a prolific writer." Once we turned her loose and gave her permission to use the vocabulary she had, that's the other thing, her vocabulary. And she did that all the time. But what was so interesting about what she did was, we videotaped a lot of this and transcribed. There was always an explanation. She didn't just say, "Oh, he was a prolific writer." See, she prefaces it, "Oh, he wrote so many books, even more than we've read yet. Even more books. He was such a prolific writer. He wrote so many books." You see how she defines right there with that word? And it reminds me of the Wiseman and Snow study, where they looked at the physical support, semantic support with parents. And they found sort of the same thing, that parents who use rare words, their children had better vocabularies. But that wasn't the end of the story. The children who heard rare words in a context of support, physical or semantic, they were the ones who learned the most rare words. So you can't just have a big vocabulary talking at kids. You've got to engage with them and give those explanations. But I listen to preschool talk, and it's not very high level. And if we could get teachers to talk bigger all the time, that's another avenue. But anyway, lots of work to do. Yeah, lots of work to do. Yes?
I'm going to go back to what you mentioned before as a list of the age of acquisition, the vocabulary list. And I'm going back again to our dual language learners and our English learners.
Yes.
If we're going to be targeting, for example, the 3 vocabulary words a day or what, we should be referencing those lists. Where can we access those lists for teachers?
Okay. You can look at the Metsala research on lexical restructuring, and they have Metsala, Jamie Metsala, Metsala, is a researcher who's worked in the area with the lexical restructuring. And then I'm blocking out, is it Wallaby? Who's the other author? What? It's Metsala, Jamie Metsala, but the other main person in this area, is it Wally? W-A-L-L-E-Y, okay. And so either of those references, and I think the Wally one maybe has even more about age of acquisition and the lists they use. There are lists, I don't know exactly where they come from. I mean, they come from inventories of children's vocabulary acquisition, the Fenton work and some of those, but someone's looked at all of those inventories, and yeah. Now, in terms of vocabulary exposure, see, I don't think we should back off with English language learners either. And but it's the phonological awareness part where we need to kind of think how that works in these classrooms. Yes?
My second question is, I'm just in awe of all the research that you can just...
Well, It's kind of a blur, actually, but it did help to have worked on the early literacy chapter for the new Handbook of Reading Research starting last spring, and we just sent the final chapter. And I teach this doctoral seminar on early literacy, and wonderful doctoral students. I just work so hard. But anyway, so.
Is there any, do you know of any research happening on the effect of vocabulary development and phonological or language development, everything in language literacy, when we have teachers who themselves are English learners?
Yes. Well, the study by Mashburn et al. That's coming out in Child Development. It's issue 80, number 3. It's May. Mine hasn't arrived yet. Because I went to my bookshelf and I only had number 2, and I thought it's May. It usually comes earlier, but anyway, it hasn't arrived at my house yet. That study.
Can you repeat that again?
I'm sorry. It's Mashburn, Mashburne, at University of Virginia. I haven't had time to go Google and see what else I can find under that name. But anyway, this new study that will be in Child Development, May issue, that looked at parent level of syntax and vocabulary, teacher level, and then the levels of the children in the classroom, and found, as I understand it, main effects for all. Now, what was your question exactly? Coming back to I've forgotten this.
What the effects are on children. Once we know the effects, then we can work on that.
Yes.
For professional development.
Yes. So, okay. So given that they found variations across the teachers, that's what I was linking on. They found variations on the teachers, across the teachers, just as Huttenlocher did when she did the syntax study. And she just took naturally occurring teachers and grouped them into, I think, 3 groups, not very complex syntax, sort of medium and high, pre and post for children, and documenting the teacher's language all year long. And the children who had the teachers who used the more complex language had more complex syntax. So I think the input studies are pretty clear that it is not a good situation when the teachers do not have the English capacity. And actually in Massachusetts, we had a law passed, 4 years ago now. Can't do bilingual education anymore. And teaching English as a second language, there's some support. But what I see in the preschool and kindergarten years, because the old Massachusetts law in bilingual ed was that all of the kindergarten instruction all year long had to be in the first language. In first grade, it was all in the first language until mid-year. And then it was some combination of the native language and English. Now, as a consequence of those stipulations in the bilingual law, when we had it, most of the teachers at the preschool level in some schools and kindergarten level, even first grade level, they were hired, and they're certified bilingual teachers, very competent in the first language of the child, but not doing so well in English, and we see it all the time. And there's been only one town in Massachusetts that I know of, and it's Lawrence. It's a little bit north of Boston, where they actually assessed all the teachers who had been bilingual teachers. They assessed their English, and then they paid for courses and support, and I think allowed 4 or 5 years for the teachers to get up to level. If they don't, they will not. But they're the only town. I don't know what their union is like because we can't do that in Boston. But it's clearly, and what I find, the phonology is an area that is very problematic. I think some of the pronunciations children are learning, they wouldn't recognize, a pronunciation in a kind of standard English. So we clearly, though at the preschool level, just workforce issues. I don't know where we're going to, so I think we need to support preschool teachers in having stronger English, and I know some early reading first projects, if it's Head Start or even child care, where the lead teacher is most likely to be a native English speaker and the teaching assistant more likely to be the speaker of the native language, whether it's Spanish or Portuguese or Vietnamese. They started out because the teachers' designations are the same under the licensing. These are not certified for the Department of Ed, but they come under licensing. And so they would both say be lead teacher. And the idea in Head Start actually is that you want to develop people, and so they co-teach. And I know a couple projects where they had to rearrange that. So only the lead teacher who's highly competent in English reads the stories. And then there are other, because in the first year or two they weren't getting the vocab. So they just weren't getting the vocab or some other things either. So it's a problem we need to deal with. So.
Not actually a question.
Okay.
I just want to tell you that I enjoyed your lecture very much, and you've given us a very strong research basis for how children learn to read and grow their vocabulary. You've given it a social justice spin. We're talking about second language learners and achievement gap. And I just want to say to the whole group that currently in California, preschool teachers are not required to know this information in terms of having to have a literacy class in the licensing set of classes.
Sure.
Even though we're increasing it from 12 to 24 units, we included health and safety, diversity, and a couple of observation classes. So I always like to get my voice out there to say that let's work together and see if we can get this excellent information that we've learned here today into a literacy curriculum and have it required of every preschool teacher.
And I would say that we have those problems at the 4-year. I have found repeatedly master's degree level early childhood teachers who do not know. I think Louisa Modes is going. So we've got problems at all levels. It's not just so. We do need to do something to get the information. And teachers want to do the right thing and want to help children, and they really do. I loved working with California. I really loved working with California.
I think this gentleman back here just summed it up beautifully and really expressed what I think we all felt in the room, and that is how much we appreciate the fact that the department was able to tap into your expertise to contribute to this document. And once it is released, it will be a wonderful resource for all of us. So thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, and thank you all.
Yeah.
Thank